Reddit has over 850 million users. Most of them are arguing about video games, posting cat pictures, or asking strangers for relationship advice at 3 in the morning. But some of the accounts on this site have been linked to murders, mass shootings, FBI investigations, and crimes so disturbing that Reddit had to invent entirely new rules to deal with them. I created this list/iceberg myself. These are all real accounts, real people, and it only gets darker the deeper we go. Let's start at the surface. If you used Reddit between 2012 and 2014, you had to know this guy. You knew him whether you wanted to or not. Ben Isenkopf was a PhD candidate at Binghamton University in upstate New York, studying ecosystem ecology. Specifically, he was researching how communally roosting crows affect their environment. And on Reddit, under the name u/Uniden, he became a celebrity. He was the excited biologist. Whenever a thread mentioned animals, plants, or anything biology related, Uniden would show up with a long, enthusiastic explanation written in his very specific upbeat style. He used phrases like, "biologist here," and got so popular that other users started imitating the format. He did an AMA. He got profiled in news articles. He had over 2.3 million karma, which at the time was an enormous number. People genuinely loved this guy. He felt like the best version of what Reddit could be. A real expert who showed up in random threads and taught you something. And then on July 30th, 2014, Reddit administrator u/Cupcake1713 confirmed what people had been suspecting for a while. Uniden had been using 5 secret accounts to upvote his own comments and downvote anyone who argued with him. The fight that finally exposed him was, of all things, an argument about whether jackdaws are technically crows. Someone disagreed with him. Uniden logged into his old accounts and downvoted them into oblivion. An admin noticed the pattern. The investigation took less than a day. Cupcake1713's official statement was pretty blunt. She said it was, quote, "some pretty blatant vote manipulation, which is against our site rules." The fall was brutal. The same community that had treated Uniden like a celebrity turned on him within hours. The jokes wrote themselves. "Jackdaws are crows" became a Reddit punchline for years afterward. Isenkopf did eventually come back under the name u/UnidenX and posted an apology. He wrote that it had been a really stupid move on his part and that the admins had been completely justified in banning him. He left Binghamton without finishing his doctorate. Now, this one isn't dark in the way some of the later accounts will be, since nobody got hurt. But it's where this iceberg has to start. Because Uniden's banning was the moment a lot of people realized something important about Reddit. The most beloved user on the platform was secretly running a small army of fake accounts to make himself look smarter than he was. And if he was doing that, you had to wonder what else was going on under the surface. Turns out, a lot. This one is wild, because it's the CEO of Reddit himself. Username u/Spes co-founded Reddit back in 2005. He left for a few years, came back as CEO in 2015 after Ellen Pao resigned during the Fat People Hate bandwave, and has been running the company ever since. So when I say u/Spes did something insane on Reddit, I mean the actual person in charge of the entire website. In November 2016, just after the US election, the subreddit r/TheDonald was at peak chaos. It was the largest Trump fan community on the internet, around 380,000 subscribers. And a lot of those subscribers were extremely upset with Reddit's CEO over various moderation decisions. So they started spamming a specific phrase in the comments. 2 words. The first one was a swear word, the second one was u/Spes. You can imagine what they were saying. So on November 23rd, 2016, Steve Huffman made a decision that, to this day, is one of the most bizarre things any tech CEO has ever publicly admitted to. He used his administrator-level database access to silently edit user comments. He went into r/TheDonald, found the comments insulting him, and replaced his own username with the usernames of the Donald's moderators. fu/Spes. The comments now said F with the names of the people who ran the subreddit. He did this without triggering Reddit's normal edited indicator, the little asterisk that shows up next to a comment when someone modifies it. As far as the database was concerned, those edits had been made by the original users themselves. It took about an hour for r/TheDonald users to figure out what was happening. Screenshots started circulating. People were comparing original comments saved in caches to what was now showing up on the live side. The story exploded. Huffman's response was, in some ways, even more remarkable than the act itself. He didn't deny it, he just confirmed it in a comment thread. His exact quote was, Yep, I messed with the "fuck you" /spec comments, replacing them with the usernames of r/thedonaldmods for about an hour. It's been a long week here trying to unwind the r/Pizzagate stuff. As much as we try to maintain a good relationship with you all, it does get old getting called a file constantly. As the CEO, I shouldn't play such games, and it's all fixed now. Our community team is pretty pissed at me, so I most assuredly won't do this again. He explained that he did it because people were calling him a file, which was happening because of the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which we'll get to later in this video. And he ended by saying his own staff was furious with him. Reddit users immediately raised the obvious question. If the CEO had this kind of access and was willing to use it, what was the point of believing anything you read on the site? Every comment, every post, every vote count could theoretically have been manipulated by an admin. The whole foundation of trust that Reddit was built on was a lie. Huffman kept his job. Reddit added some safeguards and the story died down, but the principle of what he had done never really went away. To this day, when something controversial happens on the site, people still bring up the time the CEO admitted he was rewriting their words for them. This one is darker, and it might be the most archived alleged confession in the history of the internet. Confession Bear was a meme that was huge in 2012 and 2013. It was just a picture of a sad-looking sun bear leaning against a log. And the joke was that you would add a caption confessing to something embarrassing. Most of them were silly. I eat cereal without milk. I never washed my hands at my old job. That kind of thing. On the night of April 6, 2013, a user named u/Naretto posted a Confession Bear macro to the subreddit r/adviceanimals. He titled the post, "Finally have the guts to say it." The caption on the meme read, and I'm reading this directly from the archived screenshot, "My sister had an abusive meth addict boyfriend. I unalived him with his own drugs while he was unconscious and they ruled it as an overdose." The post took off immediately. It hit over 10,000 upvotes and more than 3,000 comments within 24 hours. And the comment section split into two camps. One camp thought it was clearly a joke. They pointed out that nobody who had actually committed such an act would post about it on their main Reddit account. The other camp was already digging, within hours. Users had pulled what was described as everything: his name, date of birth, where he worked, his Facebook, his Twitter, his MySpace, his LinkedIn, the whole identity. Reddit moderators kept deleting the comments containing personal information, but screenshots were already circulating. Some users started reporting the post to the FBI's tip website. Naretto came back and tried to walk it back. His response was, quote, "If I had $1 for every time someone took me too seriously on the internet, I would be able to retire from today alone." Then he added, "Get out of your house, put on some f***ing tights and go fight crime." He posted one more meme. This one was a super cool ski instructor macro, with a caption that read, "If you joke about unalivings on Reddit without a throwaway account, you're gonna have a bad time." Then he deleted his entire account, but by then, it was way too late. The now defunct news website published an article on April 10th where they identified the user. 3 days after that, on April 13th, San Diego NBC reported that the local police had received a tip and that the cold case unit was investigating. Lieutenant Kevin Mayer of the San Diego Police Department gave a statement to ABC News. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "This may be a hoax and it may be real. We received the tip and our cold case unit is investigating it like any other tip. There were no charges, no follow-up arrest, and no public statement from police saying they had concluded the investigation." The man identified by Gawker reportedly threatened to side with a defamation lawsuit if they didn't take the article down. The article stayed up, but nothing else ever happened. So we genuinely don't know. To this day, Confession Bear is one of the most viewed memes in the history of Reddit. And one specific version of it might actually be a real confession that just slipped through the cracks because it was too unbelievable. The original post is preserved on archive sites and on Know Your Meme. You can still go and read it. The whole thread, frozen exactly as it was on that Saturday night in 2013. A guy may have confessed to a murder by using a sad bear meme, and then logged off. I have to be careful with how I cover this one, because the substance of why this man is infamous involves content that I'm not allowed to describe in detail on this channel. But the story of who he was, how he got caught, that's the story of how Reddit changed forever. His real name is Michael Brutch. He was 49 years old when he was finally exposed. He worked as a Perl programmer at a payday loan firm in Arlington, Texas. He was married. His wife had a serious medical condition that required ongoing care. He had a mortgage. By every external measure, He was an extremely ordinary middle-aged man with a normal job and a normal life. On Reddit, he was something else. Under the username u/violentacres, which he pronounced Violent Acres, Brutch personally founded and ran approximately 400 different subreddits. He didn't just moderate them, he built them. He sourced the content for them. He set the rules for them. He was the landlord of an entire neighborhood of Reddit's worst communities. The names of these subreddits were not subtle. His most infamous one was a community dedicated to inappropriate photos of people below age. Photos pulled from public social media accounts and reposted for an audience of adult men. In a 2008 Reddit user poll, that subreddit was voted Subreddit of the Year. The platform itself sent him a gold-plated bobblehead award for running it. The other subreddits he ran included communities glorifying violence against women, communities focused on harassment and racial hatred, and much worse. Some of the names of these subreddits cannot be repeated on this channel, and whenever one of his subreddits got too much heat and Reddit was forced to ban it, Brutch would simply create a replacement, sometimes within hours. He treated the outrage as a game. For years, Reddit's administrators left him alone. In fact, they actively benefited from his existence. Because Brutch ran so many of the platform's worst communities, when users posted content that was outright illegal, actual CSAM, as opposed to merely deeply offensive material, Brutch would remove it and report it. Reddit didn't have to pay anyone to do that work, because he was doing it for free. Reddit's relationship with him went beyond toleration. They publicly thanked him. A Reddit administrator named Chris Lowe later admitted to Gawker, and I'm quoting, "We just stayed out of there and let him do his thing. And we knew at least he was getting rid of a lot of stuff that wasn't particularly legal." And then, in October 2012, a journalist named Adrian Chen got his name. Chen worked for Gawker. He had been investigating the moderators behind Reddit's most disturbing communities, and he had connected enough dots to figure out who Brutch was in real life. What happened on that phone call became one of the most quoted exchanges in the history of internet journalism. Brutch begged him to not publish the article. He said his wife was disabled. He said he had a mortgage to pay. He said this would ruin his life. At one point during the call, Brutch said, "It's amazing how much you can sweat in a 60-degree office." Chen published the article anyway. The headline was, "Unmasking Reddit's Violent Acres, the biggest troll on the web." The opening line described Brutch as a man who, if you are capable of being offended, has almost certainly done something that would offend you, then did his best to rub your face in it. Reddit's reaction was bizarre. Huge subreddits, including r/politics and r/funny, banned all links to Gawker in protest. Their argument was that Chen had violated Reddit's culture of anonymity by doxing Brutch, even though Brutch had spent years using that anonymity to host content that Reddit's own administrators admitted was barely legal. Within days, his employer fired him. He lost the health insurance that was covering his disabled wife's medical care. He gave one on-camera interview to CNN's Anderson Cooper 360, where he tried to apologize. The interview was conducted by reporter Drew Griffin. Brutch told him, "Violent Acres is what I did in my spare time to unwind from my 10-hour-a-day job. That's how I relaxed in the evening. I no longer need to relax in the evening because I no longer have a job." He claimed he had only been trolling, that he wasn't really like that none of his views reflected his actual beliefs. The interview is still on YouTube. You can watch a man who hosted some of the worst content on the internet for the better part of a decade try to explain on television that it all had been a hobby. After the interview, he largely vanished. The u/Violent Acres account is gone. The subreddits he ran were eventually banned, most of them in waves over the following years, but what he did to Reddit was permanent. The strangest part is that Brutch was never charged with anything. None of what he did was technically illegal. It was just protected speech that nobody else wanted to host. So Reddit hosted it, until Adrian Chen made one phone call. In September 2012, just 1 month before the Brutch story broke, a user posted a photo to r/funny that he had taken without permission. It was a photo of a young woman at Ohio State University, and her religious practice meant she didn't remove her facial hair. The user thought this was hilarious. His username was u/European douchebag. The post got a huge amount of upvotes. The comment section was exactly what you'd expect. Cruel, dehumanizing, the worst of Reddit on display. And then something unexpected happened. The woman in the photo, Balpreet Kaur, found the thread. She introduced herself, explained her faith, and then said, and I'm reading this directly, "Yes, I'm a baptized Sikh woman with facial hair. Yes, I realize my gender is often confused and I look different than most women. Baptized Sikh believe in the sacredness of this body. It is a gift that has been given to us by the divine being which is. She just explained who she was and invited the people who had mocked her to think about why they had done it. The comment changed everything. Within hours, the post was getting downvoted. And then, the original poster, you/European douchebag, came back with a genuine apology. He wrote, quote, "I'm sorry. I know that this post isn't a funny image in any way and I should have known better. I felt the need to apologize to the Sikhs and anyone else I offended when I posted that picture. Put simply, it was stupid. Making fun of people is funny to some but incredibly degrading to the people you're making fun of. It was an incredibly rude, judgmental and ignorant thing to post." He went on. He wrote about how Balpreet's response had genuinely changed how he thought about people. He said he hoped to be a better person going forward. The whole apology was several paragraphs long. The account has since been deleted. The original photo post has been removed, but Balpreet Kaur's response and you/European douchebag's apology are both archived in multiple places, because they represent something rare on the internet. A moment when humiliation could have destroyed someone, and instead, the person being humiliated chose grace, and the person doing the humiliating actually listened. The reason this incident matters is because of what it says about Reddit's culture in 2012. The default mode was cruelty, and it took a 19-year-old college student with more grace than most adults to remind everyone that there was a human being on the other end of the photo. The accounts after this one don't have apologies. They end in arrest reports, manifestos, and police tape. This is the first confirmed murderer on this list. He was convicted and sentenced. Reddit comments preserved in court documents. Agar Hassan was 24 years old, from Cambridge, Ontario, in Canada. His ex-girlfriend was a 22-year-old woman named Melinda Vasilier. She lived in Kitchener, about a 15-minute drive away. Their relationship had ended, and according to her family, Vasilier had been clear that it was over. On April 28, 2017, Hassan went to her apartment. Police later confirmed that he had stabbed her to death inside her own home. The exact number of wounds was reported in the Canadian press as being in the dozens. After he committed the act, Hassan fled. He drove from Ontario through the United States, eventually making his way down to Texas. While he was on the run, Canadian authorities issued a Canada-wide arrest warrant. And while he was running, he made a Reddit account. 2 days after, on April 30th, 2017, a brand new Reddit account named u/ReadersBlue101 posted a long message titled, "Wanted for Kitchener My Side." The post was exactly what it sounds like, a confession, framed from the unaliver's perspective, written in real time while the manhunt was happening. I'm going to read directly from the post, which Vice News and the Daily Dot both quoted in their coverage. "I hit her with it, almost blindly, a few times. I didn't know what happened. When I left, I honestly thought she just passed out. Then I looked at the blood and started freaking out and just ran. The fact is, no one is more destroyed than I am. She was more than a girlfriend, a soon-to-be fiancé. She was my everything." Reddit users figured out what was happening within hours. They cross-referenced the post with the news coverage from Canada. They reported the account. The post was removed. The account was suspended. But by then, screenshots were already saved across multiple archive sites. Hassan was arrested on July 11th, 2017. In San Antonio, Texas. He was extradited back to Canada and faced trial for second-degree murder. In September 2019, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. What makes this case unique on this Iceberg is that it's one of the only times that a confirmed unaliver used Reddit specifically to defend himself while the search for him was still ongoing. He didn't post on Facebook, he didn't go to a news outlet, he went to Reddit, made a fresh account, and tried to make his case to strangers on the internet. The post is still preserved. Vice News quoted it directly in their reporting, BuzzFeed, and major Canadian outlets. If you want to read it yourself, it's not hard to find. In November 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were murdered in their off-campus home in Moscow. Their names were Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Sana Carnodle, and Ethan Chapin. They were all in their early 20s. They were till they passed away in the middle of the night. The case dominated American media for months. The perpetrator was caught on December 30th, 2022. His name was Brian Kohberger. He was 28 years old. He was a PhD candidate in criminology at Washington State University, just across the state line from Moscow. In July 2025, Kohberger pleaded guilty to all 4 cases to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But before any of that, before the murders and before the arrest, he had been on Reddit and and what he was doing on Reddit became part of the case against him. In May and June of 2022, about 5 months before they passed away, a Reddit user named u/criminology student posted to 2 specific subreddits. One was r/xcons, a community for people who had been incarcerated. The other was r/prison, which is exactly what it sounds like. Both subreddits were communities where people who had committed serious crimes shared their experiences. The posts were structured as a research questionnaire. The user introduced himself as a graduate student and asked participants to fill out a survey about their psychological state when they committed their crimes, which Mediate cited from Wayback Machine captures. My name is Brian, and I am inviting you to participate in a research project that seeks to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. In particular, this study seeks to understand the story behind your most recent criminal offense, with an emphasis on your thoughts and feelings throughout your experience. The post continued, asking participants to describe what they were thinking before, during, and after the crime. It asked about their emotional state. It asked about their planning. It included Koberger's real name and his university email address from DeSales University, where he had previously been a student under the criminologist Catherine Ramsland. After the murders, when investigators got search warrants for his digital activity, they pulled the posts. The Idaho State Police's search warrant requests, which were eventually unsealed, specifically asked for Reddit data tied to Koberger's accounts. The posts were preserved on Wayback Machine before Reddit suspended the account. There's something deeply unsettling about reading those questions in chronological context. 5 months before he allegedly broke into a house at 4 in the morning and stabbed 4 young people till they passed away, a man was on Reddit asking convicted criminals to walk him through their emotional state during their crimes. He wanted to know what they were thinking, what they felt, whether they hesitated, whether the survey was research or rehearsal is something we'll probably never be able to prove definitely. But the timing, and the questions, and the eventual outcome, they're all preserved. The thread is still findable through archival tools. If you go and look at it now, knowing what we now know, it reads less like a graduate research project and more like a man trying to figure out, in advance, how he was going to feel. On May 14th, 2022, an 18-year-old named Peyton Gendron drove 3.5 hours from his home in Conklin, New York, to a Tops Friendly Market supermarket in a predominantly black neighborhood of Buffalo. He was wearing tactical gear and a helmet camera. He was live streaming to Twitch, and in the parking lot and inside the store, he opened fire on shoppers and employees. 10 people were unalived, 3 more were wounded. Every victim was black. The attack was a deliberately racist act of domestic terrorism, planned for months in advance. Gendron was arrested at the scene. He pleaded guilty to state charges in November 2022 and was sentenced to life without parole. He was later convicted on federal charges in 2025 and is currently facing a federal penalty case. He left behind 2 documents. One was a 180-page manifesto outlining his racist ideology and the conspiracy theories that radicalized him. The other was a 600-page diary written on Discord, which detailed every step of his preparation. And in those documents, one platform comes up over and over and over again: Reddit. His Reddit username was u/JimboBoy. NBC News confirmed it. The username matches his Twitch handle and his Discord username, all of which were used during the attack itself. The account was suspended within hours of the shooting. But before suspension, the account had a long posting history. According to NBC News reporting, the user had, quote, frequently posted to subreddits devoted to guns, tactical gear, ammunition, precious metal trading. His diary, which the Daily Caller obtained portions of, was even more specific. Gendron wrote that during the COVID-19 pandemic, he had been radicalized primarily through Reddit and 4chan. He named specific subreddits he had spent time on. He wrote that he used the subreddit r/maskers as a research tool, studying previous attackers to plan his own attack. He named, in his diary, the names of previous mass shooters whose tactics he had studied throughout that subreddit. The Daily Beast also reported that he had used Reddit posts to express racial grievances. In one post discovered after the attack, Gendron blamed his tinnitus, a ringing in the ears, on black people. The reasoning made no sense, but it was preserved as part of his pattern of escalating racial paranoia. What's important about Gendron's case is what it represents. He is the only modern American mass shooter for whom we have a confirmed Reddit username, with a verifiable, archived history. Other shooters have had a social media presence on other platforms. Christchurch shooter Brenton Tarrant was on 8chan and Facebook. Pittsburgh synagogue shooter Robert Bowes was on Gab. But Gendron used Reddit, and Reddit, by his own admission in his own diary, was where his radicalization happened. The platform's role in his case isn't speculative. The username u/JimboBoy is preserved on Wikidata. Multiple journalists archived the account before suspension. And the diary, with its specific naming of subreddits as research tools, is part of the public court record from his federal case. There's no way to know how many other patents are on Reddit right now, posting in the same places, reading the same threads, planning whatever comes next. This one is a story about a subreddit, but it ended with one specific person walking into a public business with a loaded weapon. So it counts. In October and November of 2016, in the final weeks before the US presidential election, a conspiracy theory exploded across the internet. It started on 4chan, but it found its real home on Reddit, in a subreddit called r/Pizzagate. The theory claimed that high-ranking Democratic Party officials were running a child trafficking operation out of the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizza restaurant called Comet Ping Pong. The theory was based on absolutely nothing. The evidence was a series of leaked emails from Joan Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, in which Podesta and various friends discussed eating dinner. Believers in the theory decided that the word pizza in those emails was a code word. Every mention of food was a code. Every mention of a meeting was a code. The theory built itself out of paranoia and pattern matching. The subreddit r/Pizzagate became the central command for this conspiracy. At its peak, it had tens of thousands of subscribers. Users posted images of the restaurant and analyzed them frame by frame. They identified employees of Comet Ping Pong by name. They published the home addresses of the owners and the staff. They tracked down the children of the owners. They sent threats. The owner of Comet Ping Pong, James Alfantis, received hundreds of threats over a period of weeks. Reddit eventually banned r/Pizzagate on November 22nd. The official reason was doxing, which is the publishing of private personal information. The subreddit had crossed that line repeatedly, but by the time the ban happened, the damage was already done. The conspiracy had migrated to Vote, to 4chan, to Twitter, to YouTube. It was no longer containable. 12 days after the ban, on December 4th, 2016, a 28-year-old man named Edgar Madison Welch drove from Salisbury, North Carolina to Washington, D.C. He brought multiple weapons with him. He walked into Comet Ping Pong during business hours, when families with children were eating lunch. He discharged the weapon inside the restaurant. Nobody was hit. Welch later told police he had been there to self-investigate the Pizzagate conspiracy. He had read about it online. He was looking for the basement where the children were supposedly being held. Comet Ping Pong does not have a basement. It never had one. After he searched the building and found no evidence of any conspiracy, Welch surrendered to police outside the restaurant. In court, Welch admitted that he had radicalized himself through online content. He didn't blame any single platform, but Reddit was where the conspiracy had crystallized into the specific shape that brought him to that pizza restaurant with a rifle. He pleaded guilty to interstate transportation of a firearm and assault with a dangerous weapon. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. In January 2025, Welch was unalived in a separate, unrelated police shooting in North Carolina after a traffic stop escalated. The thing about r/Pizzagate is that it represents one of the cleanest documented cases of an online community directly leading to a real-world act of violence. The subreddit didn't just contain disturbing content. It generated the specific belief that sent a specific man with a specific weapon to a specific restaurant. The subreddit has been gone for almost a decade, but the precedent is set that a Reddit community could mobilize someone to violence, in person, with a real gun. That precedent is still there, and it has happened multiple times since. The story of r/incels is the story of how a Reddit community gave a name to a worldview, and then how that worldview kept showing up in the manifestos of mass killers. The word incel stands for involuntary celibate. It was originally coined in the 1990s, who created an online support forum for lonely people of any gender who were struggling to form romantic relationships. The community was meant to be supportive, it was meant to be inclusive. By the time the term reached Reddit, it had become something else entirely. The subreddit r/incels was founded in 2013. Within a few years, it had over 40,000 subscribers. The community had also abandoned almost everything Elena had originally intended. Their content was a constant cycle of misogynistic theory, dehumanizing language about women, and what they called black pill ideology. The belief that men who weren't physically attractive were doomed to be alone forever and that nothing could change this except violent revolution. The community openly celebrated certain mass killers. The most prominent was Elliot Rodger, the 22-year-old who unalived 6 people and wounded 14 in Isla Vista, California, in May 2014, before unaliving himself. Rodger had left behind a 137-page manifesto and a series of YouTube videos in which he described his hatred of women and his rage at not being chosen by them, with an r/incels. Rodger was sometimes referred to as a saint. The phrase "going ER" became code for committing a mass attack. ER stood for Elliot Rodger. Important note here, Elliot Rodger himself was not a Reddit user. There's no evidence he ever posted on the platform. His manifesto and his videos were written and recorded entirely off Reddit, but the r/incels community took his ideology and turned him into a martyr figure. They made his name a shorthand for a particular kind of violence. On April 23rd, 2018, a 25-year-old man named Alec Minessian rented a Ryder van in Toronto at 1:30 in the afternoon. He drove that van onto a crowded sidewalk along Yonge Street. He unalived 10 people and injured 16 more. 8 of the people were women. Just before the attack, Minessian had posted to Facebook. The post read in part, quote, "The incel rebellion has already begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the Supreme Gentleman Elliot Rodger." Supreme Gentleman was Elliot Rodger's self-description in his manifesto. After Minessian was arrested, Canadian police interviewed him for hours. He told investigators that he had been radicalized through online communities and that he had communicated, in his own words, with Elliot Rodger and Christopher Harper Mercer. The judge in his trial later dismissed those specific claims as of dubious validity, because Rodger and Harper Mercer have both passed away before Minessian's involvement could be verified. But Minessian's general claim that he had immersed himself in online communities and that those communities had shaped his worldview was confirmed by the Facebook post and by his own forensic interview. Reddit had banned r/incels in November 2017, 6 months before the Toronto attack. The official reason was the platform's new policy against communities that incite violence. The subreddit had been openly discussing scenarios involving harm to women, and Reddit administrators finally drew a line. A successor subreddit, r/braincells, was created almost immediately. It functioned the same way, it used the same vocabulary, it celebrated the same figures. After Minessian's attack, r/braincells members openly praised him, just as r/incel members had praised Rodger. The praise eventually contributed to r/braincells being banned in September 2019. The pattern is hard to ignore. A subreddit forms around a worldview, somewhere, internalizes that worldview. The user commits an act of mass violence. The community celebrates the user. Reddit bans the community. A new community pops up under a slightly different name. The cycle continues. Minessian is in prison for life with no chance of parole for 25 years. The communities he was part of are gone, and then they're back, and then they're gone again. The ideology doesn't disappear, it just moves. For most of Reddit's history, there was a subreddit called r/watchpeopledie. The name is exactly what it sounds like. The community, at its peak, had over 400,000 subscribers. It was the largest gore-focused community on the platform. The content posted to r/watchpeopledie was, for years, industrial accidents and incidents from war zones. It was filmed by surveillance cameras, dash cams, and bystanders. The subreddit's community defended itself with what they called a journalistic argument. The idea that documenting somebody passing away was a way of confronting reality, of pushing back against the sanitized version of life that mainstream media presented. Reddit administrators had quarantined the subreddit, meaning it couldn't appear in search results or recommendations, but they had not banned it. Then, on March 15th, 2019, a 28-year-old Australian man named Brenton Tarrant walked into the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the Linwood Islamic Center, and opened fire on Friday afternoon worshippers. He caused 51 people to pass away and injured 40 more. He live-streamed the entire first attack on Facebook for 17 minutes. He used a helmet camera to record everything from a first-person perspective. Tarrant himself was not a Reddit user, as far as has ever been documented. He posted his manifesto to 8chan/poleboard. His livestream was on Facebook, but within hours of the attack, the livestream footage had been ripped from Facebook and uploaded across the internet, including to r/watchpeopledie. The video was posted multiple times. It was being reposted faster than moderators could remove it. The comments under the various uploads ranged from "this shouldn't be here" to celebratory remarks. Within hours, Reddit's own administrators made a decision they had been postponing for years. They banned r/watchpeopledie permanently. And alongside it, they banned r/gore, another similar community. The journalist, Robert Evans, writing for the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, summarized the situation in a now frequently quoted line. He wrote, "If 8chan was the perpetrator's firewood, Facebook the match, and YouTube the oxygen, Reddit is a place where the fire, he said, is still smoldering." The point was that even though Tarrant himself wasn't a Redditor, the platform had become the place where his content lived on. r/watchpeople was where the video was distributed. Other subreddits were where it was discussed, debated, and in some cases praised. The attack itself happened off Reddit. The aftermath happened on Reddit. After the bans, the community didn't disappear, it just migrated to a website. It still hosts the same content. It has the same membership culture. The Christchurch livestream is reportedly still findable on it. The subreddit had existed for years. It had been quarantined. Reddit had been told repeatedly that it was a problem, but it took an actual mass livestream being uploaded to it before the platform pulled the trigger on a permanent ban. And by then, the community was already organized enough to rebuild somewhere else. This case is so strange that even people who study online radicalization sometimes have trouble explaining it. Joshua Ryan Goldberg was an Australian man in his early 20s. He was Jewish. He lived with his parents. By all accounts, he was an unremarkable young man with no friends, no job, and serious mental health issues. He spent essentially all of his time online. What made Goldberg unique was that he ran, simultaneously, dozens of completely contradictory online identities. He founded and moderated subreddits with names dedicated to violent racial hatred, including slurs against Jewish people, despite being Jewish himself. The subreddits he ran cannot be repeated on this channel. The names included slurs against multiple ethnic groups, and the content of the communities was straightforwardly genocidal. But Goldberg wasn't only running far-right subreddits. He was simultaneously posting on left-wing forums under different names, attacking conservatives. He was posting on Islamic extremist forums under different names again, posing as a recruiter for ISIS. He was posting on troll communities. He was posting on feminist communities. As a parody, every position on every issue, on every kind of forum, somewhere on the internet, was being argued by Joshua Goldberg. This was discovered because of an FBI sting in September 2015. Goldberg, posing online as an ISIS recruiter, had been chatting with someone he believed to be a fellow extremist about planning a attack on the 9/11 anniversary memorial in Kansas City. He provided detailed instructions for building a pressure cooker bomb. He suggested specific targets and tactics. He encouraged the person he was talking to follow through. The person he was talking to was an undercover FBI agent. The FBI had been monitoring extremist chat rooms for months, when Goldberg moved from generally encouraging violence to providing specific instructions to a potential threat. That crossed the legal threshold for charging him. They tracked the IP address. They identified Joshua Goldberg in Australia. They coordinated with Australian Federal Police. Goldberg was arrested at his parents' home on September 10th, 2015, the night before the 9/11 anniversary. When investigators searched his computer, they found evidence of his dozens of identities across the political spectrum. The same person, on the same machine, had been pretending to be everyone, on every side of every issue. Goldberg's legal defense was that he was mentally ill and had been incapable of forming the intent required for the charges against him. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed that he had a severe form of autism spectrum disorder along with multiple other diagnoses. He was eventually deemed unfit for trial and committed to a mental health facility in Florida, where he also received treatment. His Reddit accounts, his subreddits, the forums he had built, all of them were eventually removed. But the bizarre thing about Goldberg's case is what it revealed. A non-trivial portion of the most heated, most polarizing, most extreme content on Reddit during the years he was active had been generated by a single mentally ill young man, posing as multiple ideologically opposed people, having arguments with himself, and occasionally with FBI agents. How many other Goldbergs are on Reddit right now is something nobody can answer. He was caught only because he tried to coordinate an actual attack. The dozens of fake identities he ran were a side effect of the investigation, not the original target. In July 2020, Ghislaine Maxwell, the longtime associate of Jeffrey Epstein, was arrested in New Hampshire on federal charges related to the trafficking of underage girls. Her arrest was one of the biggest news stories of that summer, and within hours, a conspiracy theory had taken root on the internet that connected her to Reddit in a way that, even by the standards of internet conspiracies, was difficult to dismiss without taking it seriously. The account was u/Maxwell Hill. It had existed since 2006. It was, at the time of Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest, one of the most powerful accounts on the entire platform. It had over 15 million karma. It was the first account in Reddit history to surpass 1 million karma. It moderated some of the largest communities on the site, including r/world news, r/travel, r/health, and r/environment. For more than a decade, this single account had been one of the dominant voices in Reddit's news ecosystem. The conspiracy theory pointed out the obvious surface coincidences. The username was Maxwell Hill. Ghislaine Maxwell's full name is Ghislaine Maxwell. Her family had estates in places associated with hills. The account had been active for 14 years. Ghislaine Maxwell, during those 14 years, had been working, according to the federal charges against her, as a recruiter for a sex trafficking operation that operated globally. Could the most powerful news moderator on Reddit have been a woman who was simultaneously running an international trafficking ring? The theory blew up. Twitter threads connecting the dots got tens of thousands of retweets. 4chan ran with it. YouTube videos appeared overnight breaking down the evidence. For a brief window, a substantial portion of the internet genuinely believed that Ghislaine Maxwell had been secretly shaping news consumption. On one of the most trafficked websites in the world for over a decade, Vice magazine investigated. They actually contacted u/Maxwell Hill directly. The response was a pretty plain denial. The user told Vice, "Yeah, I logged on a couple of hours and saw all this shit in my PM. Quite fun actually, but conspiracy theories are by nature toxic." The account holder went on to explain that they were not Ghislaine Maxwell. They were a regular person who happened to use a username that, in 2006, had not had any dark connections whatsoever. The username was based on a family name, so they had not been recruiting victims for Jeffrey Epstein. They had been moderating subreddits about world news, travel, health, and the environment, because those were topics they cared about. Vice's investigation found nothing connecting the account holder to Ghislaine Maxwell. There was no financial trail, no travel records, and no social connections. The conspiracy theory was, by all available evidence, just a coincidence of usernames. But the conspiracy never really died. Even after Vice published their debunking, the theory kept circulating. Random people on the internet who happened to be named Maxwell Hill, and there are several of them, got harassed for years. Innocent people were doxxed, family members were targeted. The account itself eventually went private and stopped posting. The Maxwell Hill case is a strange one to end on, because the conspiracy turned out to be wrong, but it points at the same thing every other story in this video has been about. Reddit doesn't really know what's happening on Reddit. The platform is too big, the community is too many, the users too anonymous. And that's how you end up with r/Pizzagate, r/incels, and r/watch people die. Reddit has banned dozens of these communities. It bans more every year. But the architecture of the platform hasn't changed. Any group of people can still form a community around any shared interest, no matter how disturbed. That community can still grow, develop its own rules, its own language, its own heroes. And every account I've covered on this iceberg was eventually banned only after something terrible had already happened. Some of the people we just talked about have passed away. Some are in prison, some are still walking around free, having served their time and re-entered society, posting on whatever platform comes after Reddit, under usernames we don't know yet. Reddit is, in a lot of ways, an extraordinary website. It's where you can ask any question and get a useful answer. It's where you can find a community for any obscure interest you have. It's where some of the most important amateur journalism of the past 15 years has happened. It's a real public good in many ways. But it's also this. If you made it to the end of this video, thanks for watching. If you know a banned Reddit account that should have been on this list, you can just leave it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. I'll see you in the next one.